with what I'm doing. Yeah. Hold on one second. Trying to make sure this thing's charging. Should be. Okay. So, kind of unfortunate, I only brought one of the fucking batteries today. For this space case. Yeah, but I mean, I can't imagine this thing's going to be longer than an hour or two, so. You know what I mean? So, realistically, it should be fine. Yep. So as you guys can see, I still got the capital locked off. I still don't know what this 1 and 2 button does. So I'm going to just turn it off for now. I haven't gotten all the way over there yet. Hold on a second. Are we good on all platforms, or? Okay. Okay. A zoom feature though. It's nice. Can't lie. I wish I didn't have to hold an umbrella today. I wish I'd have bought the clip for the umbrella today. I would hope so at this point. Oh, we got some people out on the street too.
Kelly, thank you so much. And just so I don't avoid interference with the speakers, I'll stand back here. I want to just give a quick background for why we are here today and how this event came about. And I think that's very important because if you have followed my work at Glenn Morgan and at WeTheGovern.com, I'm a pretty public guy. I have been writing articles for many years now. And I've also been doing events here. In fact, I think the first event I remember ever organizing here was at this exact location.
I have a feeling this guy behind me is going to be an asshole.
I organized a running race called Run 'em Out of Government. Unfortunately, people didn't take that message to heart, and we're in the position where we have today. But the thing is, I don't tend to organize a lot of rallies. I speak at a lot of rallies. I'm obviously an activist. I'm a journalist. I like to expose corruption in government, of which there's an unlimited supply. But I generally don't organize rallies. And the reason why I did this, and the reason why we organized this to commit an act of free speech, apparently a radical event in Washington State lately, was because on January 10th, behind me, on the other side of the statue, I came here to an event organized by Jessica Carricker out of Ellensburg. And it was just a classic event that they were organizing. And she told me that she'd been threatened with both arrest and citation, and all kinds of other harassment that I've actually not seen on this campus before. And it was because that she wanted to have speakers like this on the ground, a generator just like that over there, and wires on the ground. And it was an explicit, specific thing that they said you couldn't have. And then after that, Doug Basler, who truly provided me the evidence I needed to run today's event, is over there. Doug had come out and actually also tried to commit an act of free speech right over here, and was also threatened with it. And what Doug was able to do is send me some video that he actually had of them saying it, and saying that they would cite him, they would arrest him, that he couldn't have a speaker, that he couldn't have a generator or wires on the ground, and that if you had a permit, you could do that, but they weren't issuing any permits. Now, if anybody's paid any attention to the First Amendment at all in the last 70 years, which means that you don't work for the Attorney General's office, then you would know that there's actually there's actually an endless supply of cases in federal court that actually explicitly say that you cannot use the issuance of a permit to suppress somebody's free speech. Period. It is not even ambiguous, except for the Attorney General's office. And so when that came out, we decided that we had to commit an act of free speech. Because, and I watched the pro-life group over here. I saw a video of them being stuck trying to hold the speakers on their lap. I mean, it was just these absurd hurdles to go through to commit an act of free speech. And so that was why I wanted to organize this event. And I wanted to make it a very clear event for free speech. As everybody here, I'm speaking, I'm committing free speech. You are all exercising your First Amendment rights because we also have the right to free assembly. Part of what we plan to be talking about here today is to petition our government for a redress of grievances, which is also quite clearly part of free speech. And as you see, multiple people with cameras here are exercising their right to free press. And as you heard earlier, we committed a great and brave act of committing to freedom of religion here. And so in my book, and according to every attorney I talked to, that was pretty much the perfect setup for the state if they were going to choose to arrest us and actually go through with the threats that they have given to a variety of groups over the last couple weeks. And I am happy to tell you that when I spoke, and again, we weren't trying to hide, I wrote an article explaining exactly what we would do here, explaining the state constitution, which is even more aggressive when it comes to our rights and freedoms. Article 1, Section 1, 4, and 5 very specifically apply to this, but also the list of all, just a handful of this federal court cases, and then the explicit misuse of the rules that were being quoted to everybody as to say why you couldn't have speakers or a microphone or wires. And to their credit, and I think it's important that we recognize this, in a conversation that I had with the people who manage the campus here, Enterprise Services, including Tommy, who I'd actually specifically profiled in my video, as well as some of the state patrolmen, they said that they were going to suspend those rules, not just because I was happy to be arrested and go write letters from a Thurston County jail, but also because they recognized that the information that we provided to them clearly had merit, and that there was a possible misuse of the rules in Washington to suppress our free speech rights. And so I do want to point out that they do recognize it's not just because Glenn's a scary guy, and I had so many eager attorneys willing to jump on this case, but it was because they're going to suspend these rules for everybody moving forward, at least for the length of the pandemic. So, the point of that isn't about me. I'm not an important guy. I'm no smarter than anybody else and no braver than anybody else necessarily. There's plenty of people who are brave and smarter than I am. But when it comes to exercising our rights, that's the point. You have to exercise them. Our rights are not just gifted to us in the bloodstream, I think, as Reagan famously was quoted. And they don't just pass down through osmosis generation to generation just because we have a document that was written several hundred years ago. You have to exercise your rights in order to maintain them, even as something as fundamental as free speech. And sometimes we have to go back to basics. And I don't think that it's a nefarious plot that bureaucrats in Olympia were trying to actively suppress us, but I do believe it doesn't matter whether it's a nefarious plot, it doesn't matter whether it's bad acting, it doesn't matter whether it's just the typical bloat of government and their inevitable incompetence the bigger they get. Whatever it is, we still have to step up and exercise our right to assemble, our free speech, and we have to push back when we see our rights being abused. It requires us to push back. And the future inevitably belongs to those who show up. And that is a truism. I say it at the end of every video I make. I know I'm not the first person to say it, even though Todd Herman has always said that I am, but I'm sure there's other people that have said that before. But the point is, you do not get your rights just given to you. You have to exercise them. You have to stand up for them. You have to be willing to confront them. Preferably not in a foolish, unthoughtful, unplanned way. Little organizations that really at some of the stuff that's been going on where they clearly are not enforcing anything related to our rights or our freedoms, and in fact have become agents of suppression and pushing back on that. And that's part of that's the inevitable nature, the blow to bureaucracy, and part of that's the corruption, I think, that inevitably comes the bigger government gets, and part of that's our fault, because out of apathy and generations of probably really poor education, we've gotten to the point where people need to wake up and we need to start pushing back and restoring the freedoms that we have, but we must exercise in order to maintain. And so I think that's an important part. That's really why we're here today. My goal being here was not to have you stand out in the rain for many hours, but it is to make sure, first it was to see if they were willing to arrest me for doing this, and then if they weren't, to actually petition our government for the redress of grievances. So before I hand this over to the next speaker, I just want to make sure that there are several grievances that I have with what's going on in Olympia. First, it was this issue today that they were threatening people to not be able to come up here and speak. Second is, I would like to remove this gate and actually the fences and actually have access to the Capitol. That is an absurd and ridiculous political theater that was put on by our politicians and bureaucrats, and it's totally unnecessary. The very same people who tell us a wall doesn't work on the southern border are telling us that this is very important for their own protection.
Yeah, amen to that.
So that's number one. Number two, this lockdown legislature that we have right now has specifically been structured in a way to deny our ability to communicate with our legislators in any effective, meaningful way to talk about the bills, some of the terrible bills that are being proposed in the legislature. And it's because this Zoom communication process gives, Senator Sam Hunt from representing this district where we're standing right now, his little fat finger there, right? He's hitting everybody on mute and making sure you don't even have an opportunity to speak in committee. That is a much more difficult thing for him to do when you're actually in person testifying on these bills. And if there's a grievance that I have, it's the denial of the citizens' right to be able to petition their legislators in a legislative session. We're right in the middle of a session, not that you would know it. And we need to have that right restored. I think it's absurd. There's not even a quorum on campus. I think any bill they pass in this legislative session is questionable in its constitutionality. The Constitution is very clear about a quorum being needed on campus. And so instead, all these legislators, we don't know who's behind the camera screen when they're voting on these bills. We don't know who's holding up notes for them to read from, and you can see that many of them, some of them are quite marginally literate when it comes to actually speaking in public anyway. But somebody's holding up a script and they're reading it right there as they're going along. We'd like to know which special interest is putting words in their mouth and giving them the script to say during these sessions. I'd like to know. And so I think that's really the next biggest grievance that I have about what's going on here in Olympia. So before I just hand this off to the next speaker, again, I'm fully aware that you're enjoying the liquid sunshine in Washington just as much as I am. But I want to let you know that I'm imagining there's going to be some other grievances coming up here as well. And I also want to introduce this next person because this next person is somebody who I think has been persecuted more than anybody in the history of the state of Washington as a political activist. 8 years of litigation by the Attorney General's office, an active effort to completely destroy his life in every measurable way, and the great crime that he committed, and if you're a bureaucrat, this is a great crime. By his actions, he has saved taxpayers over $40 billion that you would otherwise have squandered down some imaginary, goofball idea, whatever that is. I mean, if you don't believe the state squanders your money in a frivolous way, well, number one, you're not paying attention. But just for example A, that building right up there, the Employment Security Department, in their infinite wisdom, they decided to give away $600 million, supposedly to a Nigerian fraud scheme. Now, we don't know where it really went because they've actively suppressed any kind of investigation into exactly which internal employees turned off the security controls. And they actively, has come out recently with whistleblowers, told employees there to personally deny people their checks in a hostile activity purposely to make life as miserable as possible. Well, the Biden administration saw that Susie Levine, the former director of that agency, was that qualified her to get out of the JV squad and move on up to pro and go back to D.C. and show them how they, instead of just losing hundreds of millions of dollars, we can lose billions and maybe trillions and get away with it. And apparently that's what qualifies in the Biden administration. Now, their loss, our gain, we at least lose another corrupt bureaucrat in Washington. But we have a lot we can talk about. I don't mean to get to everybody, and I'm sorry about that. So the next speaker is the person who I think has been persecuted more than anybody else in the state of Washington. The Attorney General's dedicated his life. Well, he ignores the landfill and toxic waste dump that's occurring on the other side of the Capitol Lake right now. He ignores violence in our streets. He ignores violence at the hotels down here when they seize them and Antifa attacks people. He ignores all that, but by God, he has gone after Tim Eyman more than anybody else I've ever seen, and more than anybody else in the history of the state of Washington, and yet for the great crime of reducing how much taxes we pay. So for that, Tim, I want you to come on up with that setup and have you share your words of wisdom and commit an act of free speech today.
Hey, thanks very much. Let's hear it for Glenn Morgan. One of the things that he did, which I can't stand when he does this stuff, is that he says, I'm not important, I'm no big deal. Glenn Morgan is a huge deal, and we're so lucky to have him on our team.
Yes, sir.
I had the great honor of doing a traveling road tour about a year or two ago, and we called it the, help me out, Full Contact Activism Tour that we did together. And we tag-teamed it. We were speaking to various groups, and our goal was to try and inspire more people to get active and get politically active. And after about 8 stops and various speeches, we both realized that we were probably squelching an enormous amount of activism because we started talking about the kind of stuff that's happened to us. And we found it richly ironic that as we're telling stories about how we're being destroyed, and he has his own lawsuit that I'm going to talk about a little bit. But as all this stuff is happening, we're looking at all these people, and they kind of look white as a sheet and go, yeah, sounds like a great deal. Maybe we should do that too. Didn't inspire a lot with that. But it really was an amazing experience, and I had a chance to get to know Glenn. And the thing that I really admire about him is that he's a smart activist. He's not just a reckless activist. He thinks this stuff through. He understood the ramifications of what he was doing. No matter how provocative his posts were about how we were going to commit acts of free speech, he did his homework. He contacted attorneys. He had things lined up in the event that things went bad, but he didn't hide it from anybody. He shared it with the State Patrol. He shared it with the Inslee administration, with the Ferguson Attorney General's office, with all of them saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, and I provoke you, and I invite you to arrest me if you think that I'm out of line. And I thought that smart approach is something that our side needs to learn more of, is that he knew he was on solid ground, but I know a lot of us feel like we're on solid ground, but he had the guts and the smarts to do it the right way, and he got them to back down before we even did it. So let's hear it for Glenn. I really, really admire Glenn. I just think we are so lucky to have him on our side. I don't know if many of you pick up his subtle humor that he uses quite often. One of my favorite stories that he talked about is that when he was in college, he would see that the other side was having a protest, where they were starving themselves, where they were on a fast, and he would have a barbecue right next to them at the same event. in order to be able to illustrate the absurdity of the other side. And so there's something about Glenn, as with me, I think we're both acquired tastes, but I think that the humor is critical because we're in a pretty dark time right now. And if we can't use humor and a lot of dark humor, we're not going to make it through this thing. So let's hear it one more time for Glenn. Well, he did bring up my thing with the Attorney General, and I rarely have a chance to talk about it extensively because I'm usually doing something but on some kind of project. But, you know, we're talking about First Amendment, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. This Wednesday, in Thurston County Superior Court, a judge is going to make a ruling. 8.5 years of my life has been devoted to this nonstop investigation, litigation, persecution against me, my family, my supporters, all the people that have helped me over the years, and it's reaching fruition where there will actually be a decision. And regardless of what that decision is, it's already a victory, because I don't believe that the Attorney General ever thought that I would make it that long. That at some point you would give up on me, or I would give up and break and basically move to Idaho and sell real estate for a living or do something and walk away from it.
No way!
And I think it's a combination of masochism, stupidity, stubbornness, and just a belief that if they take me out, that who's going to be next? And so 8.5 years. It's hard for me to believe that we're reaching the point where there will actually be a decision. And on Wednesday, between 1:30 and 3:30 in Thurston County Superior Court, the judge is going to issue his decision. During the trial, the state said they wanted to be reasonable as far as the penalties are concerned. So the penalty they want is 7.6. Grateful that so many people have helped me reach this stage where I'm actually able to get some kind of decision. And it's an amazing thing, and I just want to say thank you, everybody, for that.
What are the charges? What are the actual charges?
The thing about this that is always difficult is that the state, throughout their investigation, realized that the process itself is the punishment. That they can mirror your hard drive. They can depose you. I've been deposed like 5 times. They deposed my wife. They deposed supporters that have helped me over the years. And they would subpoena people and ask them for the last 10 years of emails between Tim Eyman and you. And the message was pretty clear that if you help me, you will pay a price for it. So stop helping him. And what it did was I found that more and more people were willing to help me because they saw this abuse of power and they saw the injustice of it. And they say to themselves, no matter what he did, is this an appropriate penalty? To lose everything you've ever had, take away a guy's house, basically destroy his life because, as Glenn said, my original sin was being a conservative in the state of Washington and being effective at it. So the charges, I love the charges, allegations. For the last 8 years, for example, I asked people to help me and help me survive this thing. The Attorney General, during the investigation, found out that people were helping me. And they suddenly said that if Tim Eyman receives a check made payable to Tim Eyman or Tim Eyman Legal Defense Fund, that is a campaign contribution that needed to be reported.
That's sick.
Now, if you understand campaign finance law, you have to report all your contributions to a political campaign. And I'm not a political campaign. I am a person. I'm a human being. And so the state, in order to be able to bolster their argument that these are campaign contributions, came up with the novel theory that I am no longer a person. I am now a political action committee. Tim Eyman, personally, is a political action committee. It's the first time in human history a person would be considered a political action committee, but what does that mean? Normal human beings have no idea what that means. What's wrong with that? A political action committee has to report every dollar you receive and every dollar you spend, regardless of what it's for. So if I go to the grocery store, they think that that has to be on a campaign report. Money I spend on toilet paper, money I spend on car insurance. Anything that I spend my money on has to go on a campaign report on a monthly basis. But it went further than that. If you're a political action committee, you can't use your campaign funds for personal use. So I would be prohibited from using my own money to spend money for me and my family to take care of them. How do you live like that? The point is you can't. It's simply impossible. So the very concept of how can Tim Eyman continue to exercise free speech, be active politically, and yet literally can't spend his own money to take care of himself is an absurd position. But he nonetheless, the AG said, Mr. Eyman in the last 6 years has collected $766,000 in quote-unquote campaign contributions that he never reported. And this particular judge bought that line of crap and ended up ruling that way about 6 months ago. And so the headlines you read about Tim Eyman taking campaign money for personal use, you have to ask yourself the question, is a check made payable to Tim Eyman or Tim Eyman Legal Defense Fund, is that a campaign contribution? Was it okay for him to use his own money to take care of himself? You're going to have to forgive me. It's hard not for me to talk about this because it's been such a central aspect of my life for 8.5 years, and to know that I'm on the verge of maybe this is the last act of free speech that I'm allowed to give, I'm going to take this moment and talk about it a little bit, because it's 8.5 years of anger and frustration that when you're represented by an attorney, you can't talk about it. The one aspect that also happened throughout this is that about 2 years ago, I had to file for bankruptcy because the amount of costs associated with this thing got so bad that I ended up going, I just can't keep up with this. That didn't stop the litigation. It kept going. And so they eventually, the Attorney General, managed to bully my lawyer off the case. And I went to the judge and I said, Judge, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not an attorney. I can't possibly defend myself. I have no idea what I'm doing. I want to default. I want to give up. Let's just simply decide now how much the penalty is going to be, because I just can't defend myself. And this judge said, no, I'm not going to let you give up. You have to keep going. So I was forced to represent myself for about 9 months. Now, I went to Washington State University. Go Cougs! Great business education, but it doesn't teach you a lot about being in a courtroom. And so I ended up losing motion after motion after motion throughout this entire ordeal. During that 8 months, they just buried me, and I was literally not able to keep up with it. But eventually, former Justice Richard Sanders agreed to take my case. And he's been defending me for close to a year now. And he had to spend 8 months just getting through all the discovery requests that the state had hit me with. It literally cost $400,000 or $500,000 for him to do that, and I still owe him hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's what the only way I'm going to be able to pay him is for them to take my home as a result of it. And so I'm just enormously grateful for Richard that he didn't just walk away from the fight. He stuck with it and was willing to get me to the point where I actually get a decision on Wednesday. I went much longer than I expected to go today. I'm sorry about that. But I just want you to know that I am just so grateful to all of you for being with me throughout this entire fight. It's been 8.5 years. Let me let you know a little secret. You know, regardless of what the decision is, the Attorney General will find it inadequate and will end up appealing it. So this will go on for years longer. And so the thing that I'm most proud of throughout this entire 8 years during this thing as it's been going on is I think Ferguson wanted me at some point to just stop. Just to stop trying. Just to give up. And the thing that made me so happy and proud is that I basically took the advice of Glenn Morgan and say, you need to become a super activist. You need to show that this has only inspired you to do more. So I've been doing initiatives, and you've been passing them. $30 tabs, anybody? Admittedly, a very confusing initiative. Very, very confusing. 9 justices on the Supreme Court said it was too confusing for voters. I ran for governor. Probably wouldn't have run for governor if not for that lawsuit. That lawsuit inspired me to work even harder because I knew that Ferguson would want me to stop, to just slow down. And I wanted to kick it into overdrive and say, all you're doing is inspiring me to do even more. And so they're sending out attack dogs. God, the other side has learned a lot from history on what those dogs can do at free speech rallies. So anyway, I'll close with that. One more time, we would not be here today if not for Glenn Morgan. Let's hear it one more time for Glenn. We'll turn it over to everybody else again Wednesday. I just want to thank you all for your prayers, for all your support over the years. I know I would never have made it without any of you. I'm just incredibly grateful to all of you for helping me over the years, and I'm going to keep, as long as there's air in my lungs and energy in my muscles, I'm going to continue to be an activist in the state of Washington. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You can go to the hearing. It's going to be at Thurston County Courthouse where the Constitution goes to die. And I would encourage you to go to the hearing, and I know I'll probably be there as well. I've been at a number of his hearings in the past. And one thing I want to point out in Tim's case that's kind of interesting, before I hand it off to the next person, we have campaign finance laws in Washington State. Campaign finance laws are written mainly to suppress your ability to participate in free speech. Everybody likes them because they like the idea of transparency in the political process. So do I. But what happens is they're primarily used to protect political insiders and to punish political newcomers. And the campaign finance laws in the state are written in a way that is pretty much impossible for most people to comply. And I discovered this myself, despite actually teaching classes on it for a while, in 2016. And when they filed a PDC complaint against me, Public Disclosure Commission, that's the agency that enforces it, I finally went and really did my homework on it, and I started filing PDC complaints myself on the other side, because I found out that on the conservative freedom side, we had just tried to hunker down and survive the assault of complaints or the process that the Attorney General had been using to harass people. And so proportionally, I filed 620 PDC complaints against the majority of the elected officials in the state and the PACs and the unions and judges and all my friends on the other side. In fact, Senator Sam Hunt, who I mentioned earlier, who likes to mute people with testimony, he wrote a letter to the PDC and said, clearly Glenn Morgan's ignorant about the campaign finance laws in the state, after I filed the first complaint on him. And I thought, you know, he's probably right. So I went and did my homework. And the next one caused the Attorney General. It triggered a litigation against Sam Hunt. And Senator Hunt had to pay a fine. Fortunately, after I got enough of the politicians to pay fines and forced the Attorney General to file 19 lawsuits against his friends, they decided that it was time to change the campaign finance laws in Washington State. So they put a bill in 2018 called the Stop Glenn Morgan Bill. And that's what it was nicknamed. I remember that. And so they had to change some of the rules. They're still not great, but they're a little less delusional than they were before. And so the heavy hand that has come down on Tim Eyman is going to be a little bit harder to apply to the next person based on the changes that they made there. But that was a good example, actually. Good activism, exposing the truth. I still file complaints just for the fun of it. My fun, not so much for the people I file them on. But and it's the other side spent about $600,000 in payments and fines. I don't know how much an attorney fees. Nobody can figure that out. And the Attorney General and actually the PDC had to hire a lot more employees. So I accidentally grew government a little bit bigger than I had wanted to. And but nevertheless, I think that's just an example of activism. I want to talk about one more person who should come up and speak next. And Doug Basler, I know you're here. Now, as Doug's coming up here, if Doug had not recorded what the State Patrol and the Enterprise Services had said here, had not gotten the video to me, I don't think I would have organized this event today. And I want to tell you something about Doug Basler. One of the reasons why I love this guy is that I remember he got arrested for preaching the gospel down in downtown Portland in 1998, right? And what I love about it is they dragged him off the car, handcuffed him, and threw him in the squad car, and he fought it, and he went to court, and he prevailed. And immediately he left that courtroom and went right back down to Portland and started doing the exact same thing just a few minutes later on the same corner, same exact location. And I only say that because you shouldn't have to be arrested to practice our freedom and our free speech. You shouldn't have to. But you can't let that intimidate you. And you do the right thing. I mean, if they're going to arrest you, then go and deal with it and then come right back out. You do not let that intimidate you from being here and being in places like that. And with that, I just want, Doug, I know you probably have a couple other things you want to say here. And but thank you so much for giving me the evidence and the motivation to get back out here.
All right. Wow. So I usually like to start with a joke, so I have a new one. What's the difference between a progressive and a U.S. savings bond? A U.S. savings bond eventually will mature and make money. Any rate, April 26th this year, a few weeks into the lockdown, they closed our churches. And I got up on April 26th, and I heard the Lord say, you're going to have street church today. And I hadn't had street church for years. But I had a PA, a generator, a guitar, and a ton of attitude. And so I went down to Point Ruston in Tacoma, and we had church. And people were crying, and people were saying, we miss church, and we miss Jesus, and all this stuff. My mother-in-law is locked up in a rest home. They're killing her. They won't let her out. They won't let people in. We can't go see her. We got her out this week for a few days, and she's getting frail, and we're just like, Mr. Inslee, tear down this wall. I just didn't want to say that. Any rate, so we started doing street church. Immediately, the cops came, and they started to harass us. And I went, my team's not ready. And so I found a group of, a list of court cases that support us in our free speech rights, which apply to freedom of religion, like Glenn said earlier, as well as the free speech stuff. So I started to just confront the cops and say, you're wrong, and we have the right to be here. And they said, oh, you have to have a permit. But I said, but you're not giving permits. And I showed them the court case, Celia versus New York, 1952. Permits are not allowed by the U.S. Supreme Court to put a prior restraint on free speech. And pretty soon, I get a call from the Tacoma Police Department and says, anybody bothered to talk to you? I go, no. He goes, well, let's have a conversation. At the end of the conversation, he said, I am not enforcing park regulations over your First Amendment right. I don't care if you have a 100-piece rock band down there. All right. And so when and Marty McClendon, you guys know Marty, we set up, and Carrie French, just the three of us, we set up a couple of speakers and a generator, a little pop-up right over there. 3 weeks ago, Tommy Malas from Enterprise Services came over, and I said, no, you're wrong. And I got my phone out and I started recording. We gotta be ready to go toe to toe. Then I said, well, look, if you're going to threaten us with arrest, see, if they threaten you with arrest, you don't have to get arrested. You can sue them, and they cannot hide behind their office. If they violate your civil rights, they have no qualified immunity. They are personally responsible. And so then they said, well, you can go over there. So we went over there on the other side of that fountain and set everything up for our radio show, our table, our equipment, our microphones. We got everything set up, and they came and said, oh, no, this is private property. You can't do it here either. I'm like, you bastards. I mean that in the Christian way, okay? So I'm just saying, look, it's harassment. So I called Pacific Justice Institute, and they had already offered to defend us. And they were saying, we will come, we will defend you. And I said, okay, how much is this going to cost? They go, sir,